This is superficial. I understand that this is superficial. Foundational history, culture, and lived experience have been grounded on this. The guy that wants to simply call the whole thing off is not a neutral player in the game. He or she is an agent on behalf of forces in the game. Take responsibility for that position. Okay, so I'm actually recording this preliminary discussion, which we can leave in or take out as we see fit. But I do want to just announce Glenn Loury here, The Glenn Show, and I'm with Stephanie Lepp, who is a producer and futurist and runs the Infinite Lunchbox Studio, which produces video about important social issues, holds up a mirror so we can see ourselves and grow in the process, as she says, and is all involved in all kinds of, I think, hopeful, sort of civic-minded kind of effort to reckon with the partisan conflict of our time that, just is tearing us apart. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the Glenn Show.
Glenn. Good to see you.
And to see you. We go way back, Stephanie.
We do. We do. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah. I mean, I've witnessed your own evolution too, which I've been grateful to both witness and help document. So
one of your media projects, Reckonings, did an in-depth kind of discussion, interview, exploration with me of my own, intellectual, emotional, and personal journey that was instrumental. This is going back how many years, Stephanie? Like 8
almost
years?
10 years ago.
Like that, 10 years?
Yeah.
But when I was just getting myself going on beginning to think about seriously trying to undertake the preliminary effort to write my memoir, you were there. You were a key player.
Yes. Well, and I would say you were also a key player because I was looking for people who were brave enough to look in the mirror and grow from what they see. And you are maybe one of the bravest out there. So, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So, okay, we're talking, what are we talking about? We're talking about your new project and your new endeavors. And do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. So, we're talking about Faces of X. Faces of X is a series of short videos that seeks to integrate different perspectives on divisive culture war issues like gender, abortion, and race, keeping it light. The format is very simple. The format is it's in the triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And it's the same person playing all three. So we're kind of steel manning the thesis and antithesis. They're going back and forth to both sides of the debate. And then synthesis enters, again, the same person, and attempts to integrate their perspectives. So the format is very simple, but I do think that the synthesis is rich. It's not centrism. It's not both sidesism. I like to say it's unlikely that one side is entirely right. It's also unlikely that both sides are equally right. What's most likely is that most of us are partially right, and some of us are more right than others, which doesn't make for a great tagline, but that's kind of what's up when we're contending with the complexity of reality. So ultimately, Faces of X is ultimately not really about the individual issues. It's ultimately about cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and perceive reality more fully.
Okay. We have some examples at hand of your effort. You're taking all the fun out of the culture war.
That's what you don't like about. Okay, we can still fight.
I'm trying to provoke you a little bit, and I'm trying to interrogate my own reaction because it's too pat. It's just too pat, And there are things really worth fighting about. There are dark forces in the world that have to be opposed, and things like this.
Totally.
Anyway, yes.
Well, I mean, I would say it is a little too pat, and that's something that I struggle with creatively because it's not like this side, the other side, integration, and now we're happy. Like that's it is too pat, but I'm responding to I'm responding to what we the current state of things. So I hope that someday these videos are boring. That would be amazing, right? But, in order to get to where we wanna go, we gotta start from where we are. So it is kind of too pat, I think, like, creatively speaking and even intellectually speaking, but I think it's also, a helpful departure from where we currently are. And I guess you also said that some things are, um some things there are some things about which there is no gray. Some things are absolutely black and white, right? This is not, yeah, this is not, it's not that I want to turn all black and white into gray. I want black, white, and gray. I want it all, right? And ultimate, yeah. So, um, I mean, there's more I can say on that, but maybe we want to get a little more specific before we get theoretical.
Yeah, let's get more specific. So you, in the Faces of X, at least in this first cut, had four themes. There was gender, race, capitalism, and abortion.
Hmm.
And there were two of them that were especially of interest to me. Those were capitalism and race, because that's
Hmm.
my beat. Those are things I think about all the time.
Yes.
And I wanted to share with the audience a little bit from those episodes of your Faces of X series to give a concrete sense of what's at stake in the debate. And then I wanted to raise my concerns or objections to whether or not your framework, which is there's benefit on both sides. Let's see what we can do, meeting in the middle, so to speak. Although I know you said it wasn't exactly that.
Yeah, it's not the middle. Because
It's
the
not it's
middle
not the
is just
middle.
the halfway point between the middle is being defined by the extreme.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. I withdraw that characterization. But anyway,
Mm.
let's look at a capitalism clip.
Listen, capitalism is the most powerful prosperity generating force ever known. I think you mean the most extractive force ever known. It has lifted billions of people out of poverty, expanded access to food and literacy. It's effectively created our modern world. It has caused the extinction of hundreds of species and decimated countless traditional cultures, extracting resources faster than anything that came before. Okay, but the market is genius at driving innovation. It gives us the economic freedom to buy, sell, and compete in ways that make society better off. How can you call it economic freedom when the most affordable food is diabetes-inducing junk? How can it be genius when life-saving drugs aren't fast-tracked because they don't generate enough profit? Guys, chill. Look, everyone loves to pit capitalism against socialism, but most modern economies are mixed. They combine the decentralized intelligence of the market with the stabilizing force of the state. But ultimately, capitalism and socialism share the same fatal flaw. What's that? They both prioritize one metric at the expense of others. Socialism prioritizes equality at the expense of freedom, efficiency, and innovation. Capitalism prioritizes profit at the expense of equality and sustainability.
So you cut it a little bit.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, you think something significant has been left out, Stephanie?
No, no, no. It's I mean, yes, but no, no. In terms of giving people the idea that you get the thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis walks in the door, the attempts at integration. If we're trying to give people a sense, then that gives people a good sense. Yes.
There's also the point that capitalism doesn't take into account all of the costs. So why am I not happy with capitalism, socialism? Let me try to
Even though
articulate.
you reviewed it. Yes. Yes. Tell me.
I think it's blaming capitalism for the problems of modernity. I think the global environmental threat from the fact that cities have sprung up with tens of millions of people in them all over the globe. And that a global economy has been created as hundreds of millions of peasants have come out of rural and agricultural places into these large cities. They want air conditioning. They want automobiles. They're building highways. There are skyscrapers. I do agree that that's a world historic and profound challenge to human culture. But I think the putting of the cost of that onto capitalism has led to species extinction. Capitalism has led to et cetera. As if there were any alternative to modernization. It's coming. It's an inevitability. And the real conflict, you say, at the end between equality and growth or whatever, is getting played out in minimum wage laws, how people restrict international migration, what the trade deals are, how finance is underwritten, what are the rules of corporate governance. These are all things worth fighting for, and then that there are political. Let me just finish. There are political movements identifying themselves with the market, with neoliberalism, with capitalism, with property, with liberal democracy on the one hand, and with collectivism, with socialist appropriation and whatnot. And these things are playing themselves out. And in a way, you're like not coming to grips with the historical imperative of choice over fundamental issues of political economy. And that, to me, that's begging the question.
I mean, if what you're saying is that the anti-capitalist perspective is only partial, I mean, you're speaking my love language, right? Because I totally agree with you. It is just a partial truth. And so that's what I'm trying to show here, is that each of them are representing a partial truth. But then where do we go with that? I think where we go with that is not, oh, well, I guess capitalism has its upsides and it has its downsides. Well, that's just both sides of them. Like, that's almost so obvious so as not to be even helpful, right? If we want to go a little further, a little deeper, like, a synthesis should actually give you a bigger picture. So instead of, oh, it just has its upsides and it has its downsides, it's something like, and this is what I propose here, you might think differently, but it's something like its downsides risk civilizational self-destruction, but its upsides are precisely what's enabling us to evolve beyond it, which I think is a little more rich. Yes, you're totally right that the anti-capitalist view is partial.
I don't think that's what I'm saying.
Hmm.
I,
You're saying I'm not fully reckoning with either the benefits of capitalism or the drawbacks of.
I'm saying the fact that those people come from villages and rural into these large cities and want air conditioning is not a consequence of capitalism. It's a consequence of history.
Does it have to be a consequence of Does it have to be a consequence of or is there any line in the script that claims it's a consequence of capitalism? I don't think this video is making that claim.
Okay, I want to side with capitalism, and I want my siding with capitalism to be principled, and I want it not to be negated by the antithesis part of the argument that you just summarized.
Yeah. Well, here I'll
because I want to lay off the consequences, the costs of that, consideration. It may have increased our living standard, but it has also endangered our survival. I want to say that that's not capitalism that has done that. It's capitalism is not the scientific revolution. Capitalism is not the industrial revolution, although it is implicated in the industrial revolution. And the alternative to those historical forces are what exactly? I think the dustbin of history is littered with failed social experimentation. That's et cetera,
totally.
et cetera.
there may not be, there may not have been any better alternative before now. That might totally be the case. And um, I gosh, I feel like there's so much I want to. I think
Take your time.
you know, well, I can say, it is a fun challenge to try to articulate a synthesis perspective on capitalism, abortion, gender, and race in 5 minutes or less. And it's actually much less than that because you have to first kind of steel man the different side before you even get to. So it ends up being like 3 minutes or less. So, and a proper synthesis would first obviously have to define capitalism, which I don't even do. I'm keeping so really again. Obviously, I want this is it. The scripts are important, the issues are very important, but it is worth kind of bringing us back to the fact that like this series and the purpose of this project is less about the issues and more about even just planting the even the idea that perhaps our different perspectives are not it's maybe they're not even entirely clashing. Maybe they're in some crazy way complementary, such that if we take the insights from wherever they come from, we actually get a bigger and more comprehensive view of what is going on. That's so, yes, if you're gonna, you will find many things to pick at, especially the fact that I don't even define capitalism here, right? But like, I also just want to respond to your desire to not let anti-capitalism negate. And if you look at um, the synthesis does, the synthesis says capitalism is the most extraordinary engine of economic growth we've ever seen. That is absolutely true. And capitalism has created the most over, the most prosperity in terms of overall wealth compared to everything else. That is true. This is not putting capitalism on the same kind of level as every other ism. There are very meaningful differences here that must be accounted for, if that's helpful.
That is helpful. And I'm thinking about the Green New Deal.
Mm.
And I'm asking myself whether the random person, thoughtful person, asked to vote either directly or indirectly for a representative or as a representative on that legislation would have had their perspective in any way materially affected by viewing your video.
Yeah.
And I put that question to you. What do you think?
I don't know, actually. I don't know. What do you have? If I can actually just punt this back to you for a second, do you have a hypothesis of how this video would have changed someone's view about the Green New Deal? Do you have a
Yeah.
hypothesis in mind? Yeah, what's your hypothesis? Let's start with you
And,
then.
and this is a sister or a cousin to the complaint that I'm going to bring about the race
Okay.
video, which is you actually do take a side, but you don't take responsibility for taking a side. So you're siding with the environmentalists, you're siding with the green movement in the capitalism thing because you juxtapose the bounty of the efficient technical growth against the dark consequences of the climate and whatever. I mean, you don't get literally into climate, but that's the implication. That's the kind of
So
subtext
yeah.
that
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
and I'm saying that already has given away the farm as far as I'm concerned in terms of the intellectual argument, because there's so much that's packed into the let's not do globalization and capitalist hegemony because it threatens human civilization. There's so much that's packed into that, and that's kind of almost like taken for granted here in the antithesis, and that's why I take the position that I take. That is, you've chosen a side, but
No,
kind of
I've
have.
reframed the debate actually. So I've reframed it. It's no longer capitalism versus socialism. It is economic systems that prioritize narrow metrics versus systems that account for more of what we truly value. That's the new side that I'm on.
And I'm so stuck in the old conflict that I cannot see beyond the end of my nose. Is that the implication of what you're saying?
Well, let me ask you then, Glenn. Let's see, because I also I do get where you're coming from, even if like one of the places you're coming from is this is too pat and it takes all the fun out of it. I agree with you. Again, my dream come true would be that these videos are really boring someday because it's so obvious that we just take the insights no matter where they come from and we use them to understand what's going on, right? So I guess maybe one way into this would be something like, how is this different from, like, I would say that the bridging world is too pat. Like if we want to be provocative with this still, maybe I could say something like, listening is not enough. That's kind of a provocative. Like, I don't think listening is enough. A lot of the bridging world is like, I listen to you and you listen to me and now it's over. And for me, it's like, it's over. Now it begins. Now we've put the ingredients on the table and now we get to bake a cake. Now we get to make something new. Right. So although this maybe looks a little pat for you, I would say this is a major departure from a lot of the bridging stuff where it's like, I listen to you, you listen to me, it's over. That, it's also a departure from the heterodox kind of world, which is maybe the world that you kind of associate yourself with. There, I see a lot of a lot of knee-jerk contrarianism, right? Specifically, it's knee-jerk anti-wokeness, right? So, and to me, that's also kind of boring and predictable, right? So I would say, we've learned how to do equal opportunity criticism, critiquing both the progressive and the conservative view. Like, what about equal opportunity praise? What about, taking the insights, no matter where they come from, and integrating them into a bigger picture in a way that does not devolve into boring, pat, or, superficial both sides of them. That to me would be, that's interesting. That's provocative. That's new.
Okay, I am stimulated, Stephanie. I really am. I really, really am. First of all, let me acknowledge my error and my limitation, which was I didn't see the point, as you so aptly summarized it, which was it's not either or, it's a different frame. So the product here is not the midpoint as between two fixed ends. It's a different matrix. It's a different.
Mm-hmm. It's a new dimension.
A new dimension. Yeah, I got the graph. I'm a mathematician. I got. Okay. I can see the X, Y, and then the Z. The Z axis.
Yeah.
So and you chastise me gently by pointing out the heterodox thing and the fact that can be spiritually nullifying. I mean, you can get kind of possessed with just the idea. You like the way it makes you feel. Like I say that in my book at one point when I talk about some of my political enthusiasms. I'm aware of the fact that it's got my glands flowing and I like the way it makes me feel, which is not necessarily a socially productive posture to be entering into deliberation and debate. So I see that. And in the specific case of capitalism, you're saying both systems, capitalism, socialism, are incapable of taking full account of all the relevant equities. And what we need is to take full account of the relevant equities. And that's a different way of looking at the problem. And I see that. So, okay. Okay. Let's talk about the other example that I wanted to talk about.
Imagine if your ancestors were rounded up, chained, shipped to another country, and enslaved. I don't deny the cruelty of slavery in America, but perhaps what you deny is the progress that Black Americans made despite that cruelty. We made progress for America. We fought wars for this country, and when we came home, we were lynched in our uniforms. We built America with our bare hands. Slavery didn't build America. Slavery stifled America because it took people who could have been innovating and treated them like animals. But what we did build were Black Wall Streets in cities all over the country. Ladies, look, racism has unleashed untold brutality on Black Americans, and Black Americans have exhibited untold resilience in the face of it, which makes Black Americans some of the most patriotic Americans, because despite America not living up to its ideals and its mistreatment of us, we believed in those ideals and fought to make them a reality.
That's all good. It's a clip, and it leaves out a lot of what you guys develop in that X, Faces of X face.
Faces of the race. Yeah.
And I mean, let me just confess that I loved seeing that portrayal. I love the embodiment. I love the production. Quality. It was pleasant to the eye and to the ear. The costuming, the whole bit was pretty cool. Do you want to summarize exactly what the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is in the race piece?
Yes. So, so the thesis, it's called the thesis anti-racism in the kind of Ibram X. Kendi way. The antithesis is maybe the color blindness in I would associate you with this side. Well, let's just say Coleman Hughes, the end of race politics. And then the synthesis is, I would say there's kind of three key points. I don't know what I would call it yet. Maybe post-race.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and it's really kind of three main points. One is it's not just the system and it's not just the individual, right? It's both. We must build systems that empower individuals. So that's one very kind of key, obvious point. The second kind of, also I would say kind of obvious point is yes, slavery unleashed untold brutality. And yes, Black Americans exhibited untold resilience. So those can both be true also, which makes, the kind of the beautiful, I think like a beautiful kind of potential conclusion of that is the line of which makes Black Americans some of the most patriotic Americans, because despite America not living up to its ideals and its mistreatment of us, we believed in those ideals and fought to make them a reality. But then the last kind of the last kind of point that the synthesis is making is that the biggest reparation of all might be seeing race for what it is, a lie. And just, taking that. So it's not that we need race to dismantle racism. On the contrary, if we want to liberate ourselves from racism, we actually must dismantle race.
Nice try, Stephanie. I don't even know where to begin. Let's take the thesis that slavery was devastating, but Blacks have shown resilience. Of course, that's true. Both sides of that. It's not the only truth. Some attribute the social pathologies to be observed in some quarters of African American life to the consequences of slavery. This is not resilience. This is a kind of diminishment. And yeah, of course you can.
Guide us. Okay, here. So maybe we can just start at how do you feel about the idea that it might be possible and even enlightening to integrate what Ibram X. Kendi has to say with what Coleman Hughes has to say? Let's just start there. Is that framing of the two sides kind of like a framing that you would get on board with and would want to kind of see an integration of?
Okay, that's a helpful question. And
yeah.
my answer is I think such a project would be a fool's errand.
Okay.
I think it would be completely misconceived. I think it would be magical thinking.
And that's because you think the thinking is just inherently unintegratable. Like those two ways of thinking just don't play well together.
Well, both that, but more importantly, that I don't think that's a worthy intellectual goal. I mean, I'm sorry for how this will sound. I think it's lazy. I think it presumes that either of them is creditable.
And you think neither
It doesn't.
are.
And where'd that come from? Where you say framing? Where did that? Maybe there are more than two sides. Maybe,
For sure.
you
Again,
know.
this is so simplified. So
But
yes.
Kendi, how to be an anti-racist. I mean, I think it's pop pseudo cultural criticism that caught a moment in the arc of American urban, sort of domestic politics history. It's related to a lot of stuff going on in the universities, the George Floyd and Michael Brown stuff, and it's a part of the warp and the woof. But a touchstone, an anchor around which I would try to build a pole, to which I would then juxtapose another pole. And I would say, in a similar spirit, although I'm more friendly to the concrete position of Coleman Hughes, I mean, I think a precocious young intellectual coming along who happens to be a complex social product of ethnic and culture and racial and so forth and so on, with an interesting angle of vision on life, hardly constitutes Socrates. The argument for a colorblind America that I found in the end of race politics, they were reactive. They were what is it? You have the anti-racists, but the anti-racists that are really racist because they're trafficking in these categories. That the true anti-racists were the civil rights icons. I mean,
You're
it's way
speaking
too.
like a
It's way too
synthesis
pat. It's
thinker.
way
I
too
gotta
pat.
say, Glenn, you sound like you are. I mean, but you're doing the equal opportunity criticism, right? You're seeing the flaws of each side. You're looking at the bathwater, and I'm like, okay, so where's the little baby?
No, well,
on each side?
here's what I'm saying. I could try to invoke James Baldwin or somebody. I just wrote a memoir. I'm not James Baldwin. I'm not close to James Baldwin. Don't misunderstand me to be thinking I'm comparing myself to James Baldwin. I just wrote a memoir. It's about my life as a Black man. I'm a Black man. Race is important to me. My race is African American. I'm Black. I'm a descendant of slaves forged in the 20th and 21st century on the North American continent, whose ancestors, most of them, are of African descent, although some are of European descent and some may be of Native origin, my ancestors. But my narrative, how I understand my life, is intimately connected with race. Now, to tell me that it's a lie, if I were that kind of person, I could say it offends me. I'm not that kind of person. I'm
You're
not
right.
that kind of person, but it certainly doesn't see me.
Yeah.
It is too busy to make a sophomoric point. I mean, an obvious point. This is superficial. I understand that this is superficial. Foundational history, culture, and lived experience have been grounded on this.
Totally.
The guy that wants to simply call the whole thing off is not a neutral player in the game. He or she is an agent on behalf of forces in the game. Take responsibility for that position.
Yeah. So, Glenn, I'm going to make a confession in the spirit of confessions. I I'm still I'm not I don't actually know fully where I land on that. So if you can you might be able to guess who was advising me. One of the people who was advising me on this script was Greg Thomas. And I was still very much of the and I still might be. I'm not totally sure. I think I where I was something like under what circumstances, if any, is race a useful idea? I wasn't sure I was willing to just completely close the door on race and say, under no circumstance, right? I feel like I can imagine a couple in which we might want to retain that notion. I also very much see that race has been used as a weapon. Race was invented to perpetrate racism. So I'm actually not sure fully. My position might change. This is what ended up in the script now, but I can kind of confess to you, I don't know. I'm still not fully 100% sure that I would say close the door on the idea of race always and forever. I'll just say that. I'll confess that. That said, I also just in the spirit of like this doesn't just land right in the center and everyone gets to be happy. I mean, where the synthesis lands, even with that, the synthesis is kind of, I mean, it is saying, um, the idea of race is not helpful, and reifying it in the way of anti-racism is very unhelpful. So it's landing on one, but it is saying, however, even Martin Luther King's idea of colorblindness accepts that race exists, but says we should ignore it. And that's the difference, is that race doesn't exist. And we don't need to pretend it exists in order to. However, might we still retain it in some ways? And like you just described, maybe. I'm still not yeah. So that's what
In
I'll
a
say.
world in which we celebrate Ketanji Brown Jackson's elevation to the United States Supreme Court and Kamala Harris's elevation to the vice presidency of the United States of America, and we count that as progress, in a world in which a national movement has been set afoot by a police officer discharging his weapon in a situation of law and order, based on the racial identity of the people who were involved: white police officer, black kid. I have to ask myself, the people who are devoting themselves to the project of, let's get rid of race. This is quixotic, and it's an avoidance somehow, and it. I'm sorry, because this gets personal, and I don't mean to, diminish the integrity of anybody. I'm not questioning the integrity. I just. Oh, and by the way, let's do a racial inventory of the race abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're mostly black.
Yes, they are.
Well, you know, I don't know. Maybe it's a small point. Race doesn't matter, except that with respect to the race of the persons who are raising the question about whether or not race matters.
I, I don't know if I would say race doesn't matter. Um, I think, yeah, I would say, the way that I had, race is an idea. And the way that I think about it, because this is just, me, the way that I think is I often use the refrain, under what circumstances, if any. So for me, it's under what circumstances, if any, is race a helpful idea? Helpful for what? Obviously, that begs the question, what are we trying to do here? Um, which is its own conversation, but that's how I would kind of frame that. And I mean, maybe I could just ask you, like, under what circumstances do you consider race to be a helpful idea?
I don't think it's a helpful question with respect. I prefer to say, I prefer to think in terms not of generalized theoretical declaration, but in terms of, my grandchildren.
Uh-huh.
So my son, Glenn, has a white partner. My son, Nehemiah, has a Chinese partner. My granddaughter might be dating a white guy one of these days soon. My other granddaughter decided to join a sorority that was not one of the Divine Nine, these black women's social organizations like the AKAs and like the one that Kamala Harris is a alumnus of.
Mm.
But to join a white sorority because, well, her friend, including her really good and close friend whom she brought to my son Nehemiah's wedding, is a white kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 100 years from now, Blackness won't be anything like what it is today. And I think that'll be evident in the way in which families are formed and children are being raised and partnerships of a variety of kind, including marital partnerships, are being undertaken. And I think it'll all be okay. I think it'll all be fine in the longer run.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way that Irishness doesn't mean anything like what it meant at the turn of the 20th century in terms of identity and separateness and even racial self-understanding. I think we'll get there with respect to Africanness in the American context as well in the fullness of time.
May it be
But
so.
let's call the whole thing off. Let's call the whole thing off. That's what I'm objecting to.
I hear you. I totally hear you. And I can say it sounds like we both want the same thing, right? I mean, the future that you just described, I mean, that's I think for me, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's like, what are we ultimately trying to do here? And whether your strategy is call the whole thing off or like let it play itself out. I mean, let every, like I'm okay with people kind of having different maybe strategies, but it's good to know that we have like it sounds like we're kind of trying to move in the same direction. I'm still a little torn myself about the let's call the whole thing off too, for what it's worth. Yeah. But I like the idea. I like that I like that it's as provocative as it is. I like the comparison to it's the idea of witches that enabled witch burnings. That is actually helpful for me. It's like, oh yeah, gosh, what are we doing with this idea? What are we using it for? So, yeah.
We are different generations, you and I, Stephanie. I'm in my 70s, and I'm not asking you how old you are, but you're younger than that.
I'm younger, but Greg is in between us, and yeah, he feels very strongly about calling the whole thing off.
Yeah, I know he does. God bless him. He's a good brother. He's a good brother.
Yeah. I was going to say, how would you articulate if you were, well, yeah, you're saying that you consider it not a worthwhile exercise to try to kind of articulate a synthesis.
Well, let me be completely honest because I'm on the record here about transracial humanism and about transcending identity. I mean, I have this speech I gave to the opening convocation, which is this big ceremony we have at the beginning of the school year here at Brown, called Identity and Authenticity. And basically my theme was, don't live in a silo. Don't define yourself by inherited characteristics like your race or, your sexual orientation or whatever. I mean, you are these things. I'm not saying deny them, but please don't make college into a reiteration of your identity. Think beyond the this. Think like this.
Yeah,
And
that's such
I
a
say
great
that
invitation.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
thank you. And I say this especially to the students of color who I don't want to be isolated from the fullness of the curriculum. I don't want them to not read a book because it's by a dead white male. I don't want them to not join a glee club or whatever because I want them to like grow. I want them
Yeah.
to become.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm suspicious of the identity-centered framing of the educational experience, and that's just one example of it. I mean, I want to say about this is shifting the register a little bit, but it's in the same colorblind spirit. I want to say about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin, the cop, is white, and George Floyd, the guy that got the knee put on his neck, is black. And I want to say, was that a racial incident? And it was a racial incident. I don't want to get into a angels on the head of a pin argument with someone. I'm going to stipulate that it obviously, in some profound historic ways, was a racial incident. But I still want to interrogate the move that we make when we freight so much onto it based upon the racial identity of those people in that idiosyncratic encounter that transpired between them. And that impulse is very much simpatico with a let's get beyond race point of view. So
Yes,
I'm
totally.
conflicted myself at some level.
Yeah. Well, that's I just want to say what a great invitation to incoming college students. I feel like that is like such a great age and time to be inviting them to to not be like I honestly lately find myself like almost laughing at myself anytime I say sentence that starts with I am. Like what? What am I other than a total and unbelievable mystery to myself? Like, do I have any idea? But I, so I think that's a really, and actually, the way that the race video ends is very much in this. I'll just read. Let's see each other as the multifaceted, multidimensional, much deeper than skin color human beings that we are. That is the invitation, and that's also maybe we can kind of end. I mean, you that's also kind of moving in a more spiritual dimension, and you're one of the only people I think, or maybe the only person who kind of saw the spiritual dimension of this project. So maybe we can kind of end with that. There's anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about the presidential election. I'm thinking about the fact that there was an attempt on Trump's life. You know, I'm thinking about that. If you don't accept election results, that is just like disaster for the country. And the all or nothing quality of our political debates and whatnot. And then, and I'm thinking, what's the solution? So there are procedural kind of fixes, about how you do ballots, and you have law. But ultimately, there's got to be something, there's got to be a different foundation, a more sturdy foundation. I mean, what foundation is Abraham Lincoln standing on when he exhorts the country in the time of civil war, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt in another time standing on at a time of national crisis? And I think spiritual issues will arise. I think when you ask people to make sacrifices, uh, I love that you said it's not just listening.
Hmm.
It's actively rethinking
Yeah.
that you're trying to promote, and humility. So, what are the virtues of this social practice that you would wish to cultivate? And maybe just listening isn't the thing, but certainly a kind of humility, a kind of epistemic modesty. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know everything, a sense of
Mm-hmm.
awe before the complexity of what we confront. A
Yes.
recognition that we're kind of lost, and it doesn't have to work out. Tragedy and catastrophe could await us, in a
Mm-hmm.
kind of awe. These are all, aren't they kind of cousins of some kind of spiritual,
For sure. For sure.
not
I
in the
mean,
doctrinaire way, not in a Christian Muslim kind of way, maybe more
no.
in the mystical kind of meditative kind of you know.
Even, I mean, Albert Einstein has this beautiful quote. I may not quote him perfectly, but it's something like, It's an optical delusion of consciousness to believe there are separate things. There is one whole we call universe, and our task is to develop our capacity to perceive it. And
Wow.
so it's like we all have these like different pieces, different. We think, these like seemingly different, disconnected pieces. I got this one and you have that one. So yeah, I'm trying to invite what like just to the extent that we can try to put some of these pieces together and just perceive more of the wholeness that is universe.
That is a good note for us to end on, I think, Stephanie. Unless there's something else that you would like to convey about your project, about what's coming next. Maybe I should just ask you what's next
Yeah,
for you.
what's next is kind of similar in spirit. It is I'm going to design a new format for debate that
Oh, how modest and objective is that?
well, I mean, it's new/old. Obviously, I'm drawing from historical practices like Socratic dialogue and the Talmudic practice of Hevruta. In Judaism, we are commanded to study the Talmud in pairs because it is by virtue of having different perspectives that we sharpen each other's intellect. We literally have to bring different perspectives to the table, right? So, but the idea is to design a format that incentivizes steel manning and integration, right? Because right now, the way that a traditional debate is, it's like it's one side versus the other side, and only one side can win. And wouldn't it be helpful and enlightening if we came out with actually like a broader and more complex understanding of what it is that we are debating about. So, but I'm actually wanting to design something that people can use, like you. So I'm going to be doing this over the next couple months. I'm going to need to test things out if you're open to that. But either way, I will hopefully in 3 or 4 months have something that I can give you that you can use on your show.
Oh, cool. And something tells me it's going to involve the person on one side articulating the best argument
Yes.
for the other side of the thing.
How could you have guessed? Yes, to their satisfaction. Exactly. Which is, it's something also that it's very important to do in any of our relationships, right? Like,
Yeah,
show the
well,
person that we
I'm known for
understand what they're saying.
here at the Glenn Show. I'm known for steel manning, people's arguments and for listening and then trying to re-articulate them in my own words, but faithful to their spirit. So
Yeah.
I'm very sympathetic to that idea.
Glenn, you're excellent at this. This is, you even do it when you do it when the other side is not there, which is really helpful, right? You steel man the different perspectives, and then that ends up elevating the entire conversation. Yeah, you already
Yeah.
do this excellently. Yes.
This has been the Glenn Show with Stephanie Lepp, who is a producer and futurist and proprietor at Infinite Lunchbox, which makes socially relevant, creative media products, of which Faces of X project is one such. And thanks for coming on the Glenn Show, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Glenn. I should say you can find Faces of X at facesofx.org. Thank you, Glenn.